my agent kind of calls me a method writer. I also need to get as close to the thing as possible if I feel like I'm going to do it justice on the page. I will be the first to say that none of my characters are supposed to be me, like they're not self-inserts. I really actually work sort of the opposite way in that I have to kind of climb inside my characters and live there for a while before I feel like I can really put them on paper. And that can look like all kinds of different things. When I say that I'm a method writer, I also mean that in the sense of like how I build a setting that feels convincing. So I've been working on this book in one way or another since like way back in 2016 when I wrote the first version of it. But in like May of 2023, I finished my PhD program and had to rewrite the book from the top down. And I only had a few months to do it. So what I decided to do was I sold my house and put all my stuff in storage and went and lived out of my car for almost 2 years because I just felt like in order to do this book right, especially because every single scene you're in a different place. You're in a different place in the country, you're in a different place in time. I really felt like I needed to get boots on the ground and get as close to that as possible. So I went to all of these research locations. I think I did something like 7 or 8 coast to coast road trips over the course of 5 or 6 years. But in that last like kind of 18-month stretch, I did live out of a two-door 2012 Honda for the most intensive writing of this book. I went to hundreds and hundreds of concerts. I went to record stores all over the country, and I really just got to explore. It was kind of every day I was writing something, but every day I was going, okay, what feels close to the surface? What am I in contact with? So if I had just been to a really killer live show, I would sit down and be like, oh, maybe I work on that concert scene today because I feel like I can finally describe that thing that's happening with the strobe light. Um, or it would be like, okay, I just spent, 2 hours typing in a diner in the middle of nowhere, so maybe today is the day I write that pancake breakfast scene. That's one of my favorite things about rock and roll and why I've been so obsessed with this for so long is I don't feel so alive anywhere as when I'm in the crowd for a really killer live show. This is kind of a gross book. Readers have described it as sweaty, it's grimy, it's gritty, it's dirty, it's bloody, like the whole thing kind of reeks of cigarettes and hairspray and beer. And that's very much intentional because a good rock show is not just the sound, it's the spectacle, it's the style, it's the costumes, it's the physical feeling of the subwoofers and jumping around in a mosh pit with 50 sweaty people. And that was something I really wanted to put a reader like in the middle of. So for me, every day was kind of checking in with how does the scene feel in the body, whether it's a scene in a crappy motel room or it's a scene backstage at a scuzzy little punk club. I wanted the reader to really feel that come through. And to kind of connect that to Rob a little bit, this is another thing that a reader said that I really love. Somebody called him a normie from hell, which I just absolutely loved that description. Because part of the reason Rob is there is to sort of remind you that even though you're in the thick of things with the band and with Suzanne, this is a fringe subculture. It's a fringe subculture. It's outside the mainstream, and there's some real danger to that. I've worked with a lot of musicians. I work for a magazine called The Vinyl District, and I've done a lot of music writing and other outlets as well. And so I've spent a lot of time with musicians backstage on the road doing reviews and interviews and that kind of thing. And like I said, I never try to base characters wholesale on real people from life, but there are certain personality types that you encounter over and over again in the arts, not just the music scene, but also in the theater scene, which is kind of what Villains is really about the failure of typecasting and how you can't typecast people in real life because they just will refuse to fit in those boxes. And I never want my fictional characters to feel like archetypes, but there are certain traits that you sort of need to fill those traditional roles in like a four-piece rock band. Like it takes a very different kind of person to be a front man versus a bass player. Like it takes a special kind of person who wants to be second fiddle and kind of stand in the back and be the background of the rhythm section. Whereas you need a different kind of person with a little bit of ego to be that front man and have that be persuasive. So I was thinking a lot about just sort of, the classic kind of Glimmer Twins setup. There's even a joke about that in Almost Famous where he's like, we agreed we were going to do the thing about like dark, mysterious guitar player and like dynamic frontman. It's Mick and Keith, it's Page and Plant. So there's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of that in Hot Wax for sure. But it's also kind of a book about the failure of those roles and how that sometimes doesn't work. Suzanne in her early 20s has this kind of like retroactive evaluation of the band where she says something about Gil wanted to be David Bowie and Skelly wanted to be Jimmy Page, and it was just too much weird ego to share one stage. Because I think that kind of creative ego clash is is cliche because it's true. Like that's a tale as old as time, and I've seen that happen in not just bands, but theater troupes, like you name it. In the case of many of the characters in this book, it was just getting deeply immersed in the music they would have been listening to, and that would have been foundational for them. So I had, oh God, I think like 97 days worth of music spread across like 8 or 9 playlists because each of the characters in the band had their own playlist. Suzanne had her own playlist. That was really where I came into the character crafting in this particular book. The reason I set it in 1989, interestingly, the first version of the book was actually set in 1977, but it was for a similar reason. And it had a lot to do with like that was a watershed year in music. 77 was kind of the year that punk broke. And it was sort of the beginning of the end, or so we thought, for kind of like the very hippie inflected 1960s, early 1970s rock and roll. 89 is a similar sort of watershed year, but it's sort of this dividing line between like in the late 80s, Guns N' Roses are the biggest thing in the world, and there's a lot that they stand for that I probably don't need to get into detail with you about. And then like 2 minutes later, Nirvana is happening and grunge is taking over the world, and suddenly all that Guns N' Roses stuff is like anathema to young people. So I feel like Gil and the Kills, and this is maybe a little bit personal for me. Gil and the Kills, they sort of almost make it, but they're almost too late for the movement that they're trying to be a part of is kind of already on the downswing by the time they get there and by the time they kind of get their chance. And could they have sort of survived into the grunge era and adapted themselves for that? Like maybe. But it is sort of about the beginning of the end of 20th century pop culture. And much of that for me comes from a place of like, I was also an analog child growing up. Um, and I remember very distinctly like having a childhood before the internet and how different our relationship to media was. This is very much a book about analog media. It's a book about stuff. It's a book about vintage clothes and cassette tapes and Polaroids, like everything that has just kind of moved into the digital sphere now. So that mark of 1989 is kind of like, yeah, this is the beginning of the end for this kind of music.